The great chamber of the Orion Dominion was silent. Thousands of alien officials filled the towering circular hall, seated in floating rings of stone and metal that hovered in perfect symmetry. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the air itself felt controlled, as if the entire room was holding its breath. At the center of the chamber stood a single human boy. Shackled. Surrounded by glowing restraint fields that burned faint light into his skin with every movement. He looked small compared to the vast architecture around him, almost unreal, like something that did not belong in this place. But he was standing. That alone disturbed the council more than anything else. His face was bruised, his hands trembling, but his eyes did not break. They scanned the chamber slowly, as if he was memorizing every detail of the beings who had judged him. Above him, the Supreme Arbiter of Orion hovered slightly higher than the rest. A massive alien figure wrapped in layered armor of dark crystal, his voice already echoing through the chamber before he even finished speaking. This human has been declared guilty under Galactic Law 7. The pause. Then the words that sealed his fate. Unauthorized defiance of Orion authority. Spread of anti-council ideology. Interference with controlled civilizations. A ripple of quiet approval moved through the chamber. Not emotion. Not anger. Just routine judgment. Like deleting a file that no longer served its purpose. To them, this was not cruelty. It was order. The boy lifted his head slightly. His voice came out weak at first, but steady enough to carry through the silence. I didn't commit any crime. A few of the alien delegates tilted their heads. Some activated translation implants, as if checking whether the system had misinterpreted his words. The Supreme Arbiter did not react. Innocence is irrelevant, he said coldly. Compliance is the only law that matters. The chamber remained still. The boy looked around again, slower this time. His gaze stopped on the countless representatives of civilizations that had long abandoned emotion, resistance, and chaos in exchange for control. Then he spoke again. If you control everything, then nothing you do is justice. For the first time, a reaction spread through the chamber. Not loud, not visible, but felt. A shift, a discomfort, a disturbance in something they thought could never be disturbed. The Arbiter raised one hand. This human is unstable. Proceed with termination. Energy began to gather around the execution core beneath the boy's feet. A circle of light formed, rotating slowly like a mechanical sun preparing to collapse inward. But before it activated fully, the boy spoke one last time. And this time, his voice was different. Stronger. Not loud. Not desperate. Just certain. You think this is the end. The pause. You are wrong. For a fraction of a second, the chamber seemed to hesitate. Even the execution system slowed. The boy's eyes lifted toward the highest point of the chamber, where no one usually looked, where signals were received and decisions were finalized beyond the reach of ordinary authority. And then he said it. When Earth wakes up, you will understand what you created. Silence snapped tighter than before. A few delegates shifted in their seats. One of them lowered their gaze for the first time. The Arbiter's voice sharpened. Execute him. The chamber obeyed. The light beneath the boy intensified, rising into a blinding spiral. The restraints around his body tightened, glowing brighter as energy surged through them. But even as the system activated, the boy did not scream. He did not beg. He simply closed his eyes for a moment, as if listening to something far away. And then, the execution began. Phase 2. The moment the execution was completed, the chamber did not celebrate. There was no applause. No emotion. Only confirmation. A life had been removed from the system. Efficient. Final. The Supreme Arbiter turned away first, as if the matter had already been erased from memory. One by one, the alien delegates resumed their positions, returning to schedules, treaties, and controlled silence. To them, it was nothing more than correcting a disturbance. But something remained. The boy's final words did not disappear with him. They spread. At first, it was only within the chamber systems. Automated recordings flagged the phrase as irrelevant noise. But then something unusual happened. the message replicated. Across secure channels. Across archival feeds. Across diplomatic transmissions that were never supposed to overlap. When Earth wakes up, the system attempted to classify it. Attempted to delete it. Failed again. Within hours, the phrase had reached stations far beyond Orion space. Not as a recorded speech, but as fragments appearing in corrupted data streams. Like a signal that refused to stay silent. On the outer colonies, analysts dismissed it as a transmission error. Human psychological distortion, one report stated. Final moments of a primitive species attempting meaning. Some laughed. Others ignored it completely. But not everyone did. On the mining world of Caris, 9, a junior observer replayed the corrupted feed again and again. Not because of fear, but because of something he could not explain. The boy had not sounded insane. He had sounded certain. Across the inner council sectors, the official narrative was already being distributed. A minor human insurgent was eliminated. Threat neutralized. No further action required. The galaxy accepted it easily. Humans were not considered a rising species anymore. Not a threat. Not even a concern. Just another controlled civilization that had reached its natural limit. Emotional. Predictable. Case closed. But deep inside restricted archives, where only higher intelligence clearance allowed access, something else began to surface. Old reports. Fragmented logs. Disappeared expedition records from the outer rim of the Sol system. Entire fleets that had gone silent decades ago without distress signals. Official cause, unknown spatial instability. Unofficial status, unresolved. And in every one of those sealed records, a strange pattern appeared. Before each disappearance, sensors had recorded something identical. A brief distortion in space. A structured silence. And a signal that should not exist from a civilization classified as non-expansion capable. The Council had ignored it at the time. It was insignificant. A developing world with no interstellar infrastructure, no confirmed deep space capability, no reason to even be monitored beyond basic observation. And yet, something about those old records no longer felt insignificant. Far beyond the Council's controlled space, in regions unregistered on official star maps, small patrol units began reporting anomalies. Not attacks. Not sightings. Absences. Entire regions of space where background radiation behaved incorrectly. Where communication lagged for milliseconds too long. Where stars appeared slightly misaligned with predicted positions. Nothing concrete. Nothing confirmable. Just wrongness. Every report was filed the same way. No hostile presence detected. But the crews writing those reports did not feel reassured. Because absence in deep space was never neutral. It was a warning. Back in the Council core worlds, the phrase continued to appear in isolated systems. When Earth wakes up, it began showing up in places it should never reach. Private logs. Security buffers. Even simulation training environments designed to model psychological warfare responses. Engineers attempted full resets. Memory wipes. System reboots. But every time, the phrase returned. Silent. Persistent. As if something was repeating it, without speaking. At the same time, on a forgotten listening post at the edge of Orion territory, a junior technician noticed a faint fluctuation in long-range scans. He zoomed in. At first, it looked like background noise. Then patterns began to form. Not random. Structured. Rhythmic. A coded structure buried inside cosmic static. He flagged it as interference and forwarded it to command. Within minutes, the post received a direct response from Central Authority. Do not investigate further. Archive and delete. But the technician hesitated. Because for just a second, he thought he saw something inside the signal. Not a weapon. Not a fleet. A pattern that felt like preparation. And far away, across the silent dark between stars, something unseen continued to move. Not yet revealed. Not yet awake. But no longer still. Phase 3. At first, nothing changed. The galaxy continued its routine as if the execution had never happened. Trade routes remained active. Patrol fleets maintained their patrol cycles. The Council issued its usual declarations of stability and control. But silence was no longer empty. It had weight now. On Earth, life appeared normal on the surface. Cities still glowed at night. Transportation systems moved in perfect rhythm. Markets remained full of noise and color, as if nothing in the universe had disturbed them. But beneath that normality, something had already shifted. Deep underground, far below continental plates, sealed facilities that had remained dormant for decades began to respond. Not loudly, not suddenly. Slowly, like something remembering how to wake up. In a hidden command layer beneath what was once known as the Eurasian Shield Complex, a single line of code activated without human input. No authorization key was entered. No manual override was used. Yet systems that had been dead for over 70 years began running again. Power grids that were never connected to the modern world came online. Doors sealed with layers of reinforced alloy and orbital-grade locks began to unlock one by one. In the control chambers, lights flickered awake, illuminating empty rooms that were never supposed to be occupied again. And still, no alarms were triggered. Because the system was not detecting intrusion. It was detecting permission. Across other parts of the planet, the same process was happening. Under frozen Antarctic ice sheets, structures that had been buried so deeply they no longer appeared on geological scans began to shift. Massive reinforced platforms separated ice that had never melted in recorded history. In the Pacific Trench, pressure fields that kept entire installations hidden from sonar arrays began to stabilize, allowing long-dormant docking stations to re-emerge from darkness. On the far side of the Moon, where human presence was officially considered impossible beyond research drones, dormant structures began transmitting faint energy signatures into deep space. Still no public reaction occurred. Because the surface world was not meant to know yet. Only a small group of people did. Deep inside Earth's remaining central command network, a council that no longer officially existed gathered in silence. No uniforms marked their rank. No public titles identified them. But every person in that room understood the same truth. The system had started. An elderly man stood at the center of the chamber, his face lined with age and exhaustion. He looked at the holographic projections surrounding them, dozens of activation points blinking across Earth's hidden map. His voice was low. So it has begun. No one responded immediately. Not because they disagreed. But because they had all been waiting for this moment for longer than most civilizations had existed in space. A younger officer finally spoke. All dormant sites are responding. No breaches detected. No external access confirmed. It's internal activation. Another screen shifted. A sequence of encrypted transmissions appeared, bouncing between hidden installations faster than any conventional network should allow. One of the scientists narrowed her eyes. That signal pattern, it matches the old sequence. The room grew quieter. Everyone knew what she meant. The sequence that had not been seen since the first interstellar observation of Earth's outer system decades ago. Back when the galaxy first began classifying Earth as harmless. Back when it still believed humans had no reason to hide anything. The elderly man stepped closer to the projection. On the screen, one phrase repeated through fragmented data streams, appearing across multiple systems at once like a heartbeat growing stronger. When Earth wakes up. He exhaled slowly. They already woke us up, he said. Far above them, beyond the atmosphere, space remained calm. To any external observer, Earth still looked like a quiet blue world drifting peacefully through its orbit. No weapons visible. No fleets detected. No abnormal activity. Just silence. But that silence was no longer peaceful. It was controlled. And control meant intention. Across hidden vaults beneath oceans, massive shapes began to shift inside reinforced docking rings. Power conduits that had been idle for generations pulsed with increasing intensity. Energy reserves measured in planetary scales began to reroute into propulsion systems designed for something far beyond defense. In one of the deepest ocean facilities, a massive hangar door, sealed for over a century, began to open for the first time. Water pressure screamed against containment fields as something enormous stirred within. Not a single ship. A formation. A fleet. Still hidden beneath the waves, but no longer asleep. And as Earth's hidden systems continued to awaken, far beyond the solar system, alien patrols began to notice something they could not explain. Their long-range sensors started failing in predictable patterns. Entire scan zones returned blank results. Not interference. Not noise. Just absence of information. One patrol captain stared at his console in confusion. Why is the system dropping entire sectors? No one answered him. Because the truth was already forming in the dark between stars. Earth was no longer hiding because it feared discovery. It was hiding because discovery would be too late. And somewhere deep in that silence, something massive finally completed its first stage of activation. Phase 4. The first warning came from the edge of Orion-controlled space. A patrol vessel designated Vex 17 was the first to see it. At least, that's what its surviving log claimed. The ship was drifting through an empty sector near the human border, running routine scans of unremarkable space. Stars were stable. No gravitational anomalies. No energy spikes. Nothing unusual had been detected for hours. The crew was relaxed. Too relaxed. Then the sensors flickered. At first, it looked like a calibration error. A brief distortion in long-range imaging that corrected itself almost instantly. The technician on duty marked it as minor interference and moved on. But 27 seconds later, it happened again. This time stronger. Entire sections of the radar went blank. Then returned. Then vanished again. Check external feeds, the captain ordered, leaning forward. The technician complied. And froze. Because there was something there now. Not a ship. Not a fleet. A shape forming in the distance where nothing had existed before. At first it looked like darkness deeper than space itself. A region where light seemed to hesitate before entering. But then that darkness began to organize. Lines appeared. Geometry formed. Structure emerged from nothing. And suddenly the empty space was no longer empty. It was occupied. Identify that signature, the captain said, his voice tightening. The scanner struggled. Then failed. Then rebooted automatically as if trying to escape the input. And in the brief silence that followed, the object moved. Not forward. Not backward. Just into existence. A massive warship slid out of spatial distortion like it had always been there, simply waiting to be seen. Its hull was black, not painted, but as if the concept of reflection had been removed from it entirely. No markings. No identification codes. Only a faint blue glow pulsing along its edges like a heartbeat. The crew stared. No one spoke. Then another shape appeared beside it. Then another. Then another. Space itself began to fill with silent arrivals. Not jumps. Not portals. Something worse. Presence without transition. The captain finally found his voice. Raise alert status. He stopped mid-sentence. Because the ships were not alone anymore. Between them, smaller craft began to emerge, moving with impossible coordination. Not chaotic. Not random. Perfect. Like they had already calculated every possible response the patrol ship could make. Contact Central Command, the technician shouted. But the communication panel was already filled with static. Not noise. A pattern. Structured interference that seemed to respond to their attempts to transmit. And then, for the first time, a signal broke through. Not from Vex 17. Not from Orion Command. But from everywhere at once. It bypassed encryption. Ignored channels. Cut through every known communication layer as if they were not obstacles, but suggestions. A voice followed. Human. You are entering restricted space. The captain stood up instantly. Who is this? Identify yourself. No answer. Just silence. Then the voice returned. Not louder. Not angrier. Certain. You were warned once. And then the ships moved. The first strike did not look like war. It looked like disappearance. Entire sections of space collapsed into controlled bursts of light as human vessels revealed their weapons. Beams of energy cut through Orion patrol formations before shields even had time to respond. But there was no chaos. No panic from the attackers. Only precision. Every shot hit a calculated point. Every explosion removed a specific target. No waste. No hesitation. The Orion crew tried to respond, launching defensive arrays and counterfire sequences, but their weapons never reached full activation. Something was disabling them mid-response. As if the battlefield itself had already been mapped and solved long before the fight began. Within moments, Vex 17 lost contact with its surrounding escort ships. One by one, they vanished from sensors. Not destroyed. Not drifting. Gone. The captain stared at the empty void outside his viewport. "What are they?" someone whispered. No one answered. Because the correct question was no longer what. It was when. And the answer was already too late. Far away, deep inside Orion command space, emergency alerts finally broke through control channels. Entire border sectors had gone dark. Not due to failure. Not due to malfunction. But due to removal. And in the silence that followed, the same phrase appeared across multiple corrupted channels again. Not broadcast. Not transmitted. Inserted. "You killed one. We rise." Back on Earth, deep within the submerged command vaults, activation sequences reached their next stage. Massive energy cores ignited in synchronized pulses across oceans, ice, and lunar facilities. And for the first time, full fleet coordination began to link together across planetary distances. Not as separate installations, but as one system, one mind, one response. And somewhere in that growing network, a single command line executed. No voice issued it. No council voted on it. It simply appeared. Phase 2, expansion. Phase 5. Across the galaxy, fear was no longer a rumor. It was measurable. Entire sectors once controlled by the Orion Dominion had fallen silent in the span of days. Not destroyed in the traditional sense. Not conquered in prolonged warfare. Simply erased from communication maps. Trade routes collapsed first. Then patrol corridors. Then entire border stations began broadcasting nothing but static before vanishing completely. The Council tried to maintain order, but order was no longer responding. Every fleet sent to investigate returned with fragmented logs, if they returned at all. And in every surviving report, one pattern repeated. Human presence. Not as scattered sightings. Not as isolated attacks. But as a coordinated structure that moved like it had existed for centuries beneath the galaxy's awareness. Now it was no longer hidden. Now it was expanding. Deep within Orion's central command sphere, the Supreme Arbiter stood before a vast holographic map of collapsing territories. Each red sector represented a lost system. Each flickering line represented a broken connection. The map was shrinking. Not slowly. Continuously. As if something was consuming the edges of their empire and tightening inward. "This is impossible," one of the counselors whispered. "Humans cannot sustain this level of coordination. They are a single-planet species." No one corrected him. Because correction no longer mattered. A fleet admiral stepped forward, his voice tight. "We underestimated them. Their hidden infrastructure is not defensive. It is strategic. Every engagement we've suffered was not random. It was mapping us. Studying us. Learning us." The room went silent. Then another officer spoke, quieter. "They already know how we fight." The words landed heavier than any weapon report. Because it meant every battle so far had not been a test of strength. It had been preparation. Far beyond Orion space, Earth's hidden fleet moved openly now. Not in secrecy. Not in isolation. But in formation across multiple star systems simultaneously. What once emerged from oceans and ice had become something far larger. Entire carrier groups now translated through calculated spatial corridors that bent the structure of space just enough to allow controlled movement without detection. There were no random jumps. No panic maneuvers. Only synchronized expansion. At the center of it all was the flagship. A vessel larger than anything the Orion Dominion had ever constructed. Its hull carried no decorative insignia beyond a simple emblem, a circle of blue encasing a single white star. And beneath it, the word burned into reinforced alloy. Earth. Inside the command deck, silence was absolute. Human officers stood in disciplined formation around a central tactical projection. The galaxy was displayed in real time, every movement of enemy fleets tracked and predicted several steps ahead. A young officer spoke softly. "They're pulling everything back toward the core systems." An older commander didn't look away from the map. "They finally understand what we are doing." The pause. Then the same commander added, "But they are too late to stop it." Across the battlefield regions, Orion forces attempted consolidation. Massive armadas were recalled from distant sectors, forming defensive clusters around key systems. The largest fleet ever assembled in Orion history was designated as the final barrier. Over 2,000 warships, layered shields, experimental weapons systems. Entire civilizations forced into military production. A wall of firepower designed to end a war before it fully began. They called it the last defense formation. Human analysts called it something else. The trap. Because every movement Orion made brought them closer together. Closer to a single point. Closer to a controlled convergence zone already mapped by Earth's fleet generations ago. And Earth did not rush. It never rushed. It waited until the final piece of the formation locked into place. Then the signal was given. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just one line transmitted across every human vessel simultaneously. Complete convergence. And space responded. Human fleets emerged from folded corridors surrounding the Orion Armada on all sides. Not entering. Not arriving. Already there. As if they had been waiting inside the geometry of the battlefield itself. The Orion commanders realized it too late. "This is an encirclement," someone shouted. But it wasn't an encirclement in the traditional sense. There were no escape routes because escape had never been included in the design. Earth's ships did not rush forward immediately. They stabilized positions, locked targeting arrays, calibrated distances. Then the flagship transmitted one final message across all open channels. It was not a threat, not a declaration. It was a reminder. You took one life. The pause. The galaxy itself seemed to hold still. Then the message continued. And built your empire on silence. For a brief moment, nothing moved. Not because no one could act, but because every system was calculating survival probability and arriving at the same result. Insufficient. Then the first shot was fired. It did not begin as chaos. It began as structure. Entire sections of the Orion Armada were removed in synchronized bursts of energy so precise they looked artificial. Ships did not explode randomly. They disappeared in geometric sequences, as if the battlefield was being solved rather than fought. Orion return fire was immediate, but fragmented. Their formations were already breaking apart under predictive targeting. Every maneuver they attempted was intercepted before completion. Every counterattack met a response already waiting for it. Within minutes, the last defense formation ceased being a formation. It became wreckage. Across Orion channels, panic finally broke containment. "This is not warfare," one commander screamed. "They are anticipating everything." And he was right, because Earth was no longer reacting. It was executing. On the flagship, the young officer looked at the collapsing enemy fleet and spoke quietly. "Do we continue?" The older commander finally turned from the projection. His expression was not angry, not vengeful, just final. "Yes," he said, "until they understand." Outside the viewport, stars flickered through the remains of broken fleets. And as the Orion Dominion's final organized resistance dissolved into scattered silence, one truth spread across every surviving channel, every surviving world, every surviving mind. Earth was no longer rising. It had already risen. And what came next would not be war. It would be consequence. Phase. Across the surviving worlds of the Orion Dominion, there was no celebration of survival. Only silence. Because survival no longer felt like victory. It felt temporary. Every channel, every broadcast, every remaining command station replayed the same footage on loop. The collapse of the last defense formation, the instant geometric destruction of fleets that had once been considered unbreakable. No one called it a defeat anymore. That word felt too small. On the outer colonies, entire governments began dissolving before evacuation orders could even be processed. Military commanders abandoned posts not in panic, but in understanding. There was nothing left to command that could change the outcome. And still, Earth did not advance recklessly. It advanced deliberately. System by system. Sector by sector. Not like an invading force. Like a correction being applied to a broken equation. Inside the Orion Central Command Sphere, the Supreme Arbiter remained standing before the collapsed holographic map. Only a fraction of their territory still glowed. The rest was darkness, silent, unreachable, gone. A counselor finally spoke, voice broken. We can still negotiate. We can offer terms. Humans are still a biological species. They will understand diplomacy. A long pause followed. Then the fleet admiral answered quietly. No. That single word ended the illusion. Because everyone in the room already knew. This was not a conflict that could be negotiated. It had begun before diplomacy was ever possible. Far beyond the ruined defense lines, Earth's fleet continued its advance. But something had changed. The battlefield was no longer chaotic. It was controlled silence. Human ships no longer needed to fire constantly. Entire enemy systems were collapsing as they entered range, as if their outcomes had already been determined long before contact. Orion engineers called it impossible. Human commanders called it history repeating itself. Because this war was never about territory. It was about inevitability. On Earth, billions watched the unfolding events through unified global projection networks. No panic. No chaos. Only stillness. Because for the first time, humanity was no longer reacting to fear. It was witnessing consequence. In cities across the planet, the girl's image remained visible on public monuments and digital skies. Not as a symbol of tragedy anymore, but as a point of origin. Every broadcast carried her final words beneath the visuals of collapsing fleets. When Earth wakes up. The phrase no longer sounded like a warning. It sounded like instruction. Back in space, the Orion Dominion attempted one final strategy. Not defense. Not counterattack. Surrender coordination. A galaxy-wide transmission was prepared, routed through every remaining communication channel still intact. It was designed to reach Earth directly, bypassing military filters, bypassing fleet interception. A full unconditional surrender. The message was simple. We yield. End hostilities. We accept all terms. The transmission was launched. For a brief moment, it traveled cleanly through space. Then it stopped. Not jammed. Not blocked. Intercepted. Every Orion officer in the command sphere watched in confusion as the signal froze mid-transit. It hung in space as a glowing fragment of intent that could not proceed forward. Then it dissolved. A new signal replaced it instantly. Not from Orion. Not from Earth command centers. From every human vessel across the battlefield simultaneously. The response was identical everywhere. No terms were offered when she was alive. Silence followed. The kind of silence that removes all possibility of reply. The fleet admiral closed his eyes briefly, and then gave the final order. End it. What followed was not escalation. It was completion. Human fleets ceased defensive patterns entirely and shifted into full-system shutdown operations of Orion military infrastructure. Not just fleets, but command grids, weapon factories, relay stations, and defense networks across multiple star systems. One by one, they stopped functioning. Not destroyed. Deactivated. As if the galaxy itself was being rewritten into a calmer state. Orion resistance collapsed wherever it still existed. Not through annihilation, but through loss of control. Systems they depended on simply stopped responding to their authority. And with each failure, the realization spread deeper. They were not being conquered. They were being replaced. At the center of the flagship, the young officer watched the final enemy command nodes fade from the projection. "It's over," he said quietly. The older commander did not respond immediately. He looked at the empty space where the Orion Dominion once held dominance over half the galaxy. Then he spoke. "No," he said. "It's finished." The pause. Those are not the same thing. Far behind them, Earth's homeworld remained visible in distant sensors. Quiet, blue, silver, but no longer alone. And across every surviving system, every species, every remaining fragment of the galaxy that had once believed itself untouchable, one truth remained permanently embedded. Not as a message, not as a warning, but as memory. A single human life had been taken. And in return, the galaxy had changed forever.